it, the Scottish Government must act. We do need earlier intervention. The inspection team must be in right away, not 28 days later. They must have the powers to close wards, tackle the problems and ensure the safety of patients. A sensible measure which recognises the seriousness of the problem, and yet the Cabinet Secretary resists. Families will be left wondering why. Let me turn now to the information provided to patients, relatives and the public, because I strongly believe that the public have a right to know what's happening in their hospitals and will be our partners in tackling C. diff. I invite the Chamber to consider the commitment made by the Cabinet Secretary some time ago and which was repeated in a press release in January earlier this year. Hospital by hospital reporting on a web portal which the general public could access. I wonder how many members have looked at it. A web page tucked away on the Scottish Government website which provides links to non-standardised, complex information, which incidentally is 2 months in arrears, is nowhere near good enough to allow people access to information. Some health boards don't provide information about individual hospitals. Some health boards don't provide any information at all. And the recent report by NHS Tayside, considered by their board on the 5th of November, says nothing about the outbreak because it is so out of date. We need a single website, updated in real time, showing the performance of every hospital across Scotland. And we also need guidance to NHS boards about when and how they should report outbreaks. I regret that it was 3 weeks before NHS Tayside reported the outbreak publicly, and only then did the Cabinet Secretary make a statement to this chamber. I also deeply regret that her statement was misleading. I do not believe for a minute that that was her intention, but that is the outcome, and let me back up that charge, Presiding Officer. Because members will recall the Cabinet Secretary making clear that the patients and relatives were kept fully informed at all times. I have been contacted by a family that lost a loved one in the recent outbreak at Ninewells. I have their permission to describe their experience, and I quote from their letter. Never at any time were we aware or had we been told that it was the virulent 027 strain. This information we have distressingly had to read in our local newspapers, therefore the quote in today's Evening Telegraph that families were kept informed at all times is utter rubbish. We were extremely upset by the lack of continuity between staff with their hygiene. So this confession of an outbreak of C. diff in Ward 31 Ninewells Hospital to the press and television comes as no surprise, although very distressing. The Cabinet Secretary told this chamber that patients and relatives were kept fully informed at all times. I am sure she will want to reflect on what NHS Tayside told her, as in the very clear view of this family, this was not the case. Here are some of their other concerns. The smell from the bin, which was full of soiled pads, was absolutely disgusting, and I asked a senior member of staff if it could be emptied. Her reply, use the air freshener spray, that's what it's for.
The member might reflect that, that this kind of line of argument is seen by staff in our NHS and in particular in the hospital as a direct attack on their professionalism.
Order. Jackie Baillie.
Thank you very much. I think it is appropriate to reflect the very real concerns of patients. I have already said at the start that I think our staff do a tremendous job, but I also think they need to be resourced, they need to be properly equipped, and they shouldn't be understaffed. Staff would come into the room at night, no apron, no gloves, remove the water jug and glass that was used throughout the day, and then again move on to another patient's room. The oxygen mask, blanket and pillow were lying on the floor at visiting time. At this point, we'd been told that the infection was now airborne. The nurse picked up the mask, pillow and blanket and put the mask back on her face and the pillow and blanket that had been on the floor back onto the bed. When I arrived, she was sitting in a chair by the sink in the room. There were faeces on the floor, in the sink, on Mum's nightie and all over her slippers. Presiding Officer, the most basic lessons from the Vale of Leaden Hospital have not been learnt at Ninewells, and this family's experience is heartbreaking. Let me turn to another patient at Ninewells, this time from another ward a few months earlier. This patient had been discharged from hospital while she was still feeling unwell. Here's what she had to say. On arriving home, I received a call from Ward 14 to inform me that a stool sample had tested positive for C. diff. No information was provided by 9 Miles on how to manage the infection. To be quite frank and honest, I had no idea exactly what C. diff was or how to manage it. My mother, who is registered disabled and has previously had 2 strokes and 2 heart attacks, took over my care as I was so unwell. As you can appreciate, I was extremely concerned throughout for her health and well-being and the thought that I could pass on the infection to her. This lady was not readmitted to hospital. She was not advised of what to do. She was left to manage herself with the help of her aged mother and her local GP, who she had the presence of mind to contact. She's been ill for 3 months now. But that wasn't Ward 31. Clearly other wards at 9 Miles were affected over a relatively similar time period. Did the look back consider these or just Ward 31? What was the trigger point in this other ward? And would this lady have even been counted in the stats, given that she was already at home? And is this the kind of experienced presiding officer that patients should expect? Frankly, Cabinet Secretary, this is not good enough. We need the Scottish Government to be more ambitious in tackling C. diff. And let me encourage the Cabinet Secretary to look again at Labour's 15-point plan. The Government claimed to have accepted 5 points, but frankly, this is stretching credibility. I can only identify 3, and one is so grudging, it really only qualifies as a half. We suggested more robust inspections then, as we do again today. We suggested hospital-by-hospital reporting then, as we do again today. We suggested a more ambitious heat target then, as we do again today, because the current heat target is to achieve a reduction of C. diff in Scotland of 30% by 2011. In England, they have managed a reduction of over 40% in just 1 year. We believe the target should be 50%. Is the Cabinet Secretary content that Scotland should aim lower? Let's remember that behind each of these statistics are real people and their families. We should be much more ambitious in our determination to tackle C. diff and prevent needless deaths. And this determination needs to be backed by resources. I was bemused to see the Cabinet Secretary's claim to have increased funding for C. diff by 260%. So I went on a journey of discovery assisted by the Scottish Parliament Information Centre. And members may recall the Cabinet Secretary leading a debate in Parliament on hospital-acquired infections in March 2008. There was no mention of C. diff in her contribution. The focus was only on MRSA. She did announce increased resources in the debate of 54 million over 3 years starting in April. But that was months before the outbreak of C. diff at the Vale. That line has not increased despite the plethora of initiatives, and the RCN rightly made this point during the last budget round, and it remains true today.
I must ask you to close now, please.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary, in closing, has said that the NHS would learn lessons from the Vale of Leven. On the 18th of June in this chamber, she said to the Parliament, "I am determined to ensure that the lessons learned from this exercise will help us to drive C. difficile rates down and reduce the risk to patients." She said that again in August 2008. On the 11th of September 2008, wider lessons need to be learned. On the 10th of February 2009, we will learn the lessons. On the 22nd of April, we will learn the lessons. The 24th of June, the 24th of August, and just last week in this chamber, it is important to learn the lessons. Cabinet Secretary, it is almost 2 years on now from the outbreak at the Baillie of Leven Hospital. 2 years on from people dying of C. diff.
Ms Baillie, you must close now, please.
The families of all those who have died then and since want to know how long it will take, Presiding Officer, for the Scottish Government to learn those lessons.